Alors, on va demander à Nicola de venir.
Nicola, could you please join me? Nicola Pesaresi, he represents from DG Competition for the European Commission. We worked extensively behind the scenes in the run-up to this colloquium, and we had dinner yesterday, and I would like to know whether Erkki MAILLARD is online. Erkki, are you there? He should be online. I must say that we have come to a high point in our colloquium. We're going to talk about the reform of the market. We're not going to beat about the bush. So, Erkki, can I get a confirmation that Erkki is there? I suggest that we give first the floor to EDF, because EDF have huge needs. They have been presented with quite a lot of challenges that they need to rise to. The market regulation has been very detrimental to them. It's not only the European Commission that is to blame. The member states voted in favor of deregulation. They are certainly also to be blamed for. But what can we do? How can we imagine a market reform that would make it possible for these companies, and not only French companies, but also European companies and international companies? So how can we help them, being on the map and raising their profile? And how can we make sure that they, meet people's expectations? We know that the bar has been raised very high. We expect them to produce non-stop and to produce with very cheap prices. What is it that they expect from the European market? So, Erkki, without further ado, I'd like to give you the floor, and immediately after, we will hear from Nicola. Thank you very much, Claude. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you very much for your level of energy. This is contagious, really. And thank you for organizing a debate that is very so close to the heart of EDF. How can we develop the nuclear energy? What about the framework? Nicola, we at EDF, we don't think that this is the European Commission that should be blamed. But this is a very paradoxical situation that we're talking about. When you look into the benefits and the advantages of the nuclear energy, quite logically, there should be more nuclear power because of the many advantages it has. But the paradox is that there is no more but less nuclear power. The needs for nuclear power in Europe derives from a political ambition. And so we should give credit to whom credit is due. The European Commission has raised the bar very high, and it has been fighting tooth and nail. We can only but welcome this political leadership that has been made possible thanks to the support given by the Council and the Parliament. And we need nuclear power because we need electrification to have low-carbon economies, because we will need more electricity to achieve this goal of low-carbon economy, even though we pursue another objective than the direct electrification. We have a high ambition in terms of hydrogen. We wish to produce 10 million hydrogen. You need 150 terawatt hours of electricity. This is way more than the electricity for France. And this is half of all of the renewable energy sources in Europe. What it means is that we will need other sources of energy for decarbonization, whether it takes place through the indirect or direct electrification. Well, you at Les Entretiens need not be convinced. I'm preaching to the converted here. Of course, it's interesting from the point of view of biodiversity. The land footprint is 10 times lower than the wind and the solar energy. Sophisticated studies have been conducted. Valérie was referring to to these studies, a comparison has been made of the dispatchable energies. And I think that there are also two even more important reasons. The reason number one is the industrial reason. We here talk about 1 million jobs in Europe scattered across the EU member states. It does not limit itself to France and the United Kingdom. There are many jobs in Austria and Germany. These are highly skilled jobs that are difficult to relocate. We know that economic prospects are bleak, but supporting a nuclear industry is something that is meaningful. And finally, last but not least, nuclear power is an instrument of sovereignty. And, this is the course taken by France, not for climate reasons, but for reasons of sovereignty. And I can't resist the urge of saying that nuclear energy, nuclear technology produces electricity with a lot of visibility on prices because we are less dependent upon the variable costs associated with the fuel. For thermal power, we are at approximately 80 to 90% of the fuel cost. For nuclear power, it's more 35%. This is not negligible. But and let me get to the crux of the matter. There has been a revival of interest in nuclear power. There are people who would have you believe otherwise. There are people saying that France has taken a dangerous path. This is not true. I've traveled to many countries. I went to Central European countries, to Slovenia, to Estonia, and to the Netherlands. And I've been to these countries thanks to Les Entretiens, among others, but there is a renewal of interest. And it's better not to shut down an operating a nuclear power plant. You shouldn't shut down the nuclear power plant and open a coal-fired power plant. But for this, you need a framework. For this, you need regulation. You need support, but it also presupposes to take into consideration the nuclear benefits in the economic analysis. One must take some hindsight and look at how the market operates. We should take the long view. We need secure investments. And what we see with the crisis is that the wholesale market works. This is what we call the merit order, and this is certainly fundamental. As we had been reminded by one of the previous speakers, we should keep this price signal. But for the past 20 years, there hasn't been any significant investment in dispatchable low-carbon facilities. This has not been made possible without the support of the state. And if truth be told, we're not here only talking about the support by the state. We should here talk about the visibility regarding prices. Given the current crisis, even among the ranks of the European Commission, it seems that, they are realizing that this is a way to go. Taxonomy, which was a fundamental step to recognize at political level that nuclear power, such as renewable energies, as its place in this initiatives. And luckily, this was the decision taken by the EU bodies. But a private investor will not commit to a nuclear project if it does not have any visibility and if it does not have the support from the state. Regulation serves two purposes: minimize the volatility of the market prices. There is a great deal of volatility because of the fossil fuel crisis. And second, to minimize the project overall costs. This is what you've heard from Valerie, and this will be done to the benefit of customers, to limit volatility and full costs. Paul was entered into the details of the existing models, whether it's CFD, whether it's RAB, or whether this is a more traditional model based on subsidies, like it is the case in the Czech Republic. And it might be interesting to hear the views of Nicola on this. There are many, many different models that are possible. Of course, we should not neglect what has been validated and signed off by the European Commission, which is CFD, the Contract for Difference. But this is not the only possibility. I think it's important to keep in mind what we want to achieve in terms of regulation. And I would like to leave you with a final point. Alongside those regulation mechanisms, the support from the member states should be authorized. And why not the support from the European Union? You've got the Euratom funds for research and development, but there is a lot of public money being injected in nuclear power. This is true for modular reactors. This is also true for the new generation reactors. And this is the competitive framework in which we move. We're not all by ourselves in Europe. In front of us, we have a fierce competition coming from the US. And so we should reopen the box and re-examine the support from community funds. And finally, we should work on market design, how the electricity market operates, so that we address this issue of volatility and long-term signal. What is quite interesting now is that among the emergency measures, one is supposed to share the rent. That is to say, the money that the energy producer is going to earn between the medium-term cost price and the long-term cost. He will pass this money. It could be that he's going to pass this money on to the customers. This measure is difficult to enforce. It may come too late, but it's sending a signal. If you want investments in nuclear dispatchable facilities, then you should agree that, the producers are not there to live off the back of customers. At least I'm speaking about those looking after their customers. They're there to cover, to hedge their backs and to make sure that there is some visibility as to the long term. That is why we need to work on the long-term and medium-term cost of investments. We need visibility on the investments we need. It means that we should keep the most appropriate signal price on the short-term markets, and it presupposes an evolution of the competitive thinking, and maybe Nicola could talk about it. We might have to take into consideration the value for the industry, the value it represents in terms of supply and security supply. Thank you very much, Erkki. And without further ado, I would like to Nicola. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Claude for having invited me. Thank you very much, Erkki, for those comments on the role of nuclear power. I must say that that there are many things that I agree with, but there are also quite a lot of things that I disagree with, and allow me to start by reminding you of the role and the function of the European Commission, and more particularly the role and function of DG Competition. And we know that the DG Competition has been, asked to address a number of urgent issues. The Commission is the guardian of the treaty, including the Euratom Treaty. And the European Commission is not only guarding the treaty, it is enforcing the treaty. The role of the European Commission is to preserve and to strengthen the inner market. We had a financial crisis, a major financial crisis. We've also suffered from a major COVID crisis. In the wake of these crises, many people came to us to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank God for a DG competition that tried to preserve the integrity of the inner market. Had it not been for DG competition, I don't want only to throw flowers at DG competition, but the role of the DG competition is to preserve the role of Europe. And we know that we need solidarity and European Union if we want to survive this crisis. Failing that, there will only be national solutions. And these national solutions will not be enough. They might be enough for 6 months, maybe, and afterwards there's going to be war among the member states as to how to support their national industries or their national consumers. So you shouldn't throw the baby with the bathwater. I think that this is how the saying goes. DG competition, compared to what I've heard, that is to say the need to finance projects, including in the field of nuclear power, well, DG competition never was an obstacle. Of course, it's time-consuming. But, if the projects are well defined, it doesn't take up such a long time. We heard the example from Mr. Grudler. He talked about the project of European economic interest in the field of hydrogen and batteries. Member states complained that the European Commission took a lot of time to examine those projects. This is true, simply because the member states failed to do what they were expected to do. They took a corporate project and they submitted this project to the European Commission, expecting the European Commission to examine this project. There was no screening. There was no evaluation done of the project through the lens of the national interest, through the lens of public money. Nothing of that nature was done. If member states wish to delegate this role to the European Commission, it shouldn't come as a surprise that it takes up such a long time. And then we've examined also very wide-ranging projects, phenomenal projects. We are more than willing to take a closer look at all of this, to take a closer look at what companies are asking for and whether what they're asking for is necessary. We made our calculations, we have our experts, and we reached the conclusion that aid in a certain number of cases is not proportionate. Don't believe everything you hear. Unfortunately, our role is to challenge the companies and to ask them to review what they are asking for. Companies have got their interests. We, as a European Commission, have our own interests as well. Our interest is to preserve integrity of the internal market. It means to preserve fair competition among operators. And in terms of state aid, it means granting aid whenever they are necessary, making sure these aids are proportionate and it doesn't result in any distortion of the competition. We've, I think, demonstrated that we can finance nuclear projects using a system. This might not necessarily be the best system, but it worked. Mr. Spence was saying that this might actually be a very profitable project for the British taxpayers. The same was done for Hungary. We approved the scheme. We are now in the process of examining a case in the Czech Republic. Of course, the financial package is very complicated. We need to examine whether all of these aids are necessary and which are the requirements that will make it possible for the incumbent operator, which is dominant on the market, to facilitate competition with other operators. I think that these are very sound principles that should be complied with. You can't give carte blanche to nuclear power simply because it is nuclear power. I'm sorry to say, but this is not a view of the European Commission. The Commission, in light of the Euratom Treaty, can certainly justify investing in nuclear power projects. That's what we've done. That's what we're going to continue to do. We look at the merits of the project and we sign them off if they deserve our support. And if all goes well, they will deserve our support. Sometimes we have discussions with the member states, it's true, but normally the fundamentals should be there. I haven't really heard there are problems associated with the analysis that has been performed by the European Commission. Could you tell me what has been the problem you have experienced? What is the hindrance? What is the stumbling block that has been put in your way by DG Competition? Well, I will give you the floor for a couple of minutes. Well, I can't resist the urge of reacting to what you were talking about. The idea was certainly not to criticize the European Commission, but rather the internal market that we built together. Or you consider nuclear power to be just like any other commodity and the nuclear companies are just like any other companies. But this is what we wish to challenge. And that is what we would like the European Commission to be aware of. We're not here, to criticize the European Commission. But how could the European Commission help with a market reform? We're not talking about favoring the nuclear power, but we need to make sure we have long-term visibility. We need to make sure that we earn enough money to invest, because we here talk about long-term investment with a deferred profitability, 10 to 15 years, as we've heard from Valérie. And so, whether the Commission accepts the financial projects right away or whether it takes a longer period, that's all good. We're glad that you accepted CFD for the Brits. We are glad that you accepted the loan for PAX because, Hungary is, I think, already small enough. We should stop, otherwise they will suffocate. We should think in terms of the domestic interests and the general interest, and very often these go hand in hand. Allow me a couple of words on solidarity. You will have to tell me what the solidarity challenges are. There is division among the member states, and when they vote on the directives that you submit reluctantly to their approval, they say no and they renationalize their policy. This is distorted competition among the member states, and this is unacceptable. These are the questions that we would like to get an answer from you. And we are now going to give the floor to Philippe Herzog.
Merci. Oui, mais moi je vais intervenir comme un vieux routier de l'intérieur des institutions.
Let me take the floor as a senior member of the European institutions. You will remember, possibly, when the very doxa of DG Competition was actually raised. In fact, DG Competition, and I agree with you, let's not throw the baby with the bathwater, and you don't throw away a factor of unity. It's quite right, but the way Europe is designed, is that Europe Commission has to play a role, not to filter projects individually, but it has a role to play based on several objectives of the European Union. And I'm coming to the very heart of the issue. I also took part in the Economic Advisory Council in France, and we produced reports on the competition policy in various countries, France, but also in the US and elsewhere. The problem is always the same. How do you ensure compatibility between competition policy and industrial policy? My experience as an MEP, my experience as a Commission member is that for 20 years, the industrial policy has been rejected. Now, I do not suggest we completely throw away this doxa, but I suggest we reform it to ensure, yes, indeed, a large European market is needed. That's true. But initially, the competition policy is something that is about opening up. So this is how it's built. But I did not decide to follow suit with an industrial policy. And it's only recently that the topic has been raised. And I'm quite surprised if you look at the semantic evolution these past years. We just started to recognize the need for an industrial policy. It even came from Germany at some point. I can't remember with the one who was Commissioner for Industry when Germany changed its attitude and said we have competition issues everywhere and competence issues everywhere, and we have an issue with industry. And so there it is. The issue of competence is put on the table. So competition policy, yes or no, with an industrial policy, yes or no at European level, and not simply at national level. It is obvious that today, when it comes to energy or to armaments, for instance, the issue of an industrial policy is on the table. And even when it comes to digital, the issue of a European cloud has been raised, just like the question of Galileo was raised, where we needed common infrastructure to develop industrial policy everywhere in the States with community tools that were very difficult to obtain. The cloud, we're very late on this. That's quite clear. Let's not play on words. But I would like to have additional answers on this. When it comes to, the environment, the Commission completely shifted. Renewable energies are out of the market. They were very much boosted because of this German idea that new developing industries need to be supported. That's what we did with renewables. They've been supported, they've been funded, they were the first on the market, they were out of the market, clearly. So I contradict this idea that the European policy was there for an industrial policy. It forgot this idea of an industrial policy. Why not develop it for nuclear power when we did it for renewables? Now, from the point of view of economic theory, we had a Nobel Prize winner, Maurice Allais, from France, and this was, in fact, a Nobel Prize that was praised by Samuelson. He said if Maurice Allais had been translated in English, the economic science would have saved half a century. He says that growing revenues need economies of scale, so it's quite different from the normally regulated sectors. So we need economies of scale. We're asking for an industrial, European industrial sector to have these economies of scales. We cannot relaunch the EPRs without economies of scale. This is why we need a new doctrine. There's a whole theory of the industrial doctrine. Now, Philippe, I'm sorry, I will have to interrupt you, says Claude. So from the point of view of a political choice, there are two objectives, competition and industry. But from an economic point of view, when there are economies of scale, the relevant market, the Commission, often raise the question of the relevant market. The relevant market can be European or even broader. So the way we filter, or the way you filter at Commission level with derogations on a case-by-case basis is not sufficient. We need better than that. We need more than a derogation. We need a space for that kind of market. I'm sorry, I'll give you the floor, Nicola. And we'll give the floor to Erkki, and then we'll move to Mrs. Sophie Mourlon, who's waiting for us, and she's connected, and she'll say a word for France. She will talk about the political cooperation, and we have a Czech colleague who sent an excellent contribution, so it's really worth listening to both of them before our conclusions. Nicola, you have the floor. Briefly. Oh, gladly, yes. Thank you. I share your point of view. I will not insist, or I did not insist on this point sufficiently in my presentation. The role of DG competition is strongly related to the market and to the regulation of the energy market in particular. So it was obvious that the regulation of the energy market in Europe was ensured by the current industrial policy in the energy sector. It was designed in a certain way, but is it good? Is it bad? It's a question that is on the table. I do not want to take a stand on this because it is not my role and because I don't have a solution to offer. I know that several experts have been discussing this, and it hasn't been possible to find a swift solution, not because they didn't want to, but because it is a complex issue. Of course, what will be defined in the future by way of market regulation will be the general framework in which the competition policy will have to be placed. The framework that we have today is one where we integrate all sources of energy, and they're all on an equal footing. Well, yes, they are, because renewables were boosted. Yes, truly, yeah. It is a result of the fact that it took time to recognize the role of DG Competition on this. DG Competition was the first one to raise a hand and say this public support system needs to be stopped in view of the market conditions. In the former guidelines, we had imagined a bridge between the old way of supporting renewable energy and the new way of supporting renewable energy. And the existing system is much less of a boost. Now, if there were contracts for difference in both ways, in the way they were presented, there would be a risk. Yes, indeed, there would. We would have a solution with a risk of this unequal boost, and this is a risk that we've underlined many times in the past. So I agree, the general framework is more important. The general regulatory framework is important, but I think that this framework, whatever it is, should, in any case, protect the way the market operates. And it should at least be one to give a price signal. I'm not saying that it should be a full price signal or it should be that only, but without a price signal, there would be no market, there would be no exchange, there would be an unregulated economy. I mean, if there's no price signal, it would become extremely difficult to act on the market. And if I were in a member state, I would be very interested in keeping energy in my country, and I would not necessarily share it with people in another country. So let's be careful about that, because if we can't find a solution, there may be perverse effects on the internal market for energy, which we contributed to. Last year, in the winter, we've experienced difficult times, and coupling electricity markets in Europe allowed us to, protect ourselves from these difficult times. Yes, well, let's not get back to this. I mean, doping or boosting was not the only point. Priority of renewables on the grid is something that had a big impact on the other sources of energy. When there was no wind and no solar, we asked for nuclear to contribute. And when nuclear was not there, it was gas that contributed. Let's not get back to this analysis. I'd like to give the floor to Erkki and then to Sophie just after that, with Ladislav, who might be connected as well and waiting for us. It's so interesting. We'll have another conference, that's for sure. Erkki, the floor is yours. Thank you, Claude. I'd like to mention 2 points simply. These are very complex issues, of course, and sometimes in France, we tend to oversimplify and say either that it's the fault, it's another power that's responsible, or it's DG Comp that is responsible. In the area of energy, and we hear it from what Philippe Herzog said, or from what Nicola PESARESI said, it's not really that question. Of course, in several states, bureaucracy can take time, and it's almost physiological. But that's not the issue. Compensation measures that may be asked as a compensation for state aids that could indeed create challenges with regards to the industrial policy is not really at stake. What is at stake is the way competition is organized on the market. And will this competition allow for the development of investments that will lead to a low-carbon economy? I mean, it's DG Energy that would be more on the front line here and not really DG Competition. At the moment, there's no price signal sent by the market. There is no such thing. For the past 20 years, it has not happened. We have renewables on the market, not because there was a price signal, but because the doors were opened. And it's good. We will need nuclear power and renewable energies. Yes, but with a proper balance, Erkki. Yes, but what I mean is that if we did not develop nuclear power in Europe, it's not because the Commission prevented it. It's because governments were not always ready to launch programs. It's only when programs are launched that we go and see the Commission for state aids. So it's not really an issue with DG Comp. It's rather a question of articulating the concerns for an industrial policy. So in the solutions, we need to take account of state aids, and also it's also an approach of technologies. I mean, that it's not an issue for DG Comp, it's an issue for legislators. Why is hydrogen produced from low-carbon electricity recognized in the same way than hydrogen produced or generated with wind farms? I mean, from an environmental point of view, it doesn't make sense. Why couldn't nuclear projects benefit from European funds? This has nothing to do with a balanced system. It's a bias that was introduced in the system. So market design in states and technological neutrality on the other hand. Thank you. We will not start this debate again, but if we look at an industrial policy or a services policy, I mean, you did not talk about services, but at the time we invented one word. This would suppose, and this was said by Nicola as well, this was presuppose another market framework and another mandate for DG Competition, because if we change the market framework, another mandate will be needed. What we criticize is the mandate that was given to DG Competition. We're not criticizing DG Competition, but this is not carved in stone. If it were, we would have major crises, major changes. And we have a treaty that was signed 20 years ago. Everybody is changing. I mean, the US are reinvesting full speed. They are 25 times more powerful than we are in research. Biden added more investments because he wants to be ahead of the Russians and the Chinese, and we are waiting. We are regulating, applying more rules and saying, no, sorry, I mean, they are in the treaty. We can't change them. I think that we need to completely understand what's going on. We need to understand those changes, which are opportunities, and we will do so together, Nicola. That's the idea. Maybe, I might not be there much longer because I will have to stop someday, but society and the institution have to work together. Companies such as EDF are remarkable, but I mean, we should be happy by the fact that we have such industrial companies. We are weakening them. Our state did not need the Commission to weaken EDF, that's quite sure. No, I'm saying it. I can say that. Of course, everybody has its share of the burden, probably, but regulation and management of a company when you are a shareholder is important, especially a company that provides such services. So let's be careful. Let's not do the same with aeronautics. We had this debate. I see for you in the room. I mean, we were told, be careful. In 15 years' time, you will no longer be the leaders. This was said 15 years ago, and we are losing leadership. What should we do to wake up on time and start working?